Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
12 hours earlier, the mood in the pre-mission briefing room had been light despite the tension of an upcoming deployment. 5 seasoned soldiers surrounded Kel, their commanding officer, as he outlined the parameters of their reconnaissance mission. "Signals coming from the dead zone," Kel explained, pointing to a blinking dot on the holomap. "Unusual frequency, possibly civilian in origin." Vex, the team's communications specialist, snorted. "A distress call from the dead zone? That's like getting a dinner invitation from a black hole." His dark humor earned chuckles from the others. "Dead or not, we check it out," Kel replied, though a small smile tugged at his lips. "Wheels up in 30. As the team dispersed to gear up, Kel noticed Raya, his second in command, lingering by the weapons locker. She was studying a small holographic pendant that projected the image of a young child. "Everything okay?" he asked, approaching quietly. Raya quickly closed the pendant, tucking it inside her tactical vest. "Just my usual ritual," she said with a forced lightness. "Visited the fortune teller in the lower district before deployment. She said today isn't my day to die." She winked. "I like those odds." Kel squeezed her shoulder. "Keep that luck close. I want everyone home for Tanner's birthday bash next week." Tanner, their demolitions expert, grinned from across the room. "The commander remembers. See, I told you all he cares." The easy camaraderie continued as they boarded the transport. 8 of them in total. Kel, Raya, Vex, Tanner, along with Cruz, Jace, Lynn, and Dex. A team that had survived 17 missions together. A team that trusted each other implicitly. "Just another milk run," Vex called out as the transport lifted off. "Be back for dinner." 12 hours later, pain was the first sensation that greeted Kel back to consciousness. A sharp, throbbing ache pulsed through his left side, warm blood seeping through the torn fabric of his tactical suit. The acrid smell of burning synthetics and scorched earth filled his nostrils as he forced his eyes open, blinking away the grit and ash that had settled on his face. Around him lay the twisted, smoking remains of what had once been their transport vessel. Jagged metal jutted from the earth like broken bones, still glowing orange at the edges. Bodies, or parts of them, were scattered among the wreckage. His team, his friends. He spotted Raya's hand, her luck pendant crushed beneath debris, its projection flickering weakly before dying out. Kel pushed himself to his feet, staggering as the world tilted violently around him. His training kicked in through the haze of pain, assess injuries, secure perimeter, find survivors. A quick inventory revealed 3 broken ribs, a deep laceration on his thigh, and likely a concussion. Nothing immediately fatal. He limped through the debris field, checking each body he encountered. No pulses, no survivors. The ambush had been perfect, the attack coordinated with military precision. They never stood a chance. That's when he saw her. She lay half buried in ash at the edge of the wreckage, her blue skin a stark contrast against the gray-black soot. Her breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible, but definitely there. One arm was twisted at an unnatural angle, and a deep gash across her forehead leaked indigo blood down the delicate ridges of her face. Kel recognized her species immediately. He'd been briefed extensively on the anatomy and weaknesses of these blue-skinned warriors. They were the enemy. This one was no different. Even unconscious, there was something lethal about her. The perfect muscular symmetry, the precision in her bone structure. She'd been engineered for combat, trained to kill without hesitation. Except something wasn't right. Her presence here, unconscious and wounded, made no tactical sense. Unless a cold realization washed over him. The distress signal that had drawn his team to this remote canyon, the perfect positioning of the ambush, the way she had been placed just far enough from the main attack zone to survive. She was the bait, and his entire team had fallen for it. His hand moved instinctively to his sidearm, fingers tightening around the grip. One pull of the trigger, and he could avenge his fallen comrades. It would be justified, expected. But as he stood over her, watching the subtle rise and fall of her chest, something stayed his hand. A thought unbidden and unwelcome. She too might be a pawn in someone else's game. The decision made itself when the ground trembled beneath his feet and the sky darkened ominously above. A storm was rolling in, one of the legendary ash storms that could strip flesh from bone. They both would die if they stayed here. Holstering his weapon, Kel knelt beside the alien woman. With a grunt of pain from his own injuries, he lifted her onto his shoulders in a firefighter's carry. Her body was surprisingly light, almost fragile despite her warrior physiology. "You better be worth it," he muttered, though she couldn't hear him. The canyon walls loomed on either side as Kel trudged through the ash-laden landscape. The air grew thicker with each step, visibility decreasing as the storm approached. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the barren wasteland in stark flashes of blue-white. He felt her stir slightly, her body tensing against his. For a brief moment, her eyes fluttered open, iridescent orbs of violet that seemed to pierce through him. In that fleeting instant of consciousness, she registered the impossible. A human was carrying her to safety. The canyon narrowed, funneling the approaching storm winds into a deafening howl. Ash particles swirled violently, stinging Kel's exposed skin. His legs burned with exertion, and his wounds screamed in protest. But he pushed forward, driven by a primal instinct to survive. Ahead, barely visible through the thickening storm, the outline of a structure emerged. An abandoned outpost carved into the canyon wall. Shelter. Kel stumbled the final distance, practically falling through the rusted doorway. The interior was dark and musty, but blessedly free from the storm's fury. He gently lowered the alien woman onto the dusty floor before collapsing against the wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The storm outside intensified, winds howling like tortured souls. Security protocols ingrained through years of training forced Kel back to his feet. He examined the doorway, sturdy enough, but the lock mechanism was corroded beyond use. From his pack, he retrieved a compact welding tool. The blue flame cast eerie shadows across the walls as he sealed the door shut, effectively trapping them both inside until the storm passed. Or until he decided otherwise. With the door secured, Kel turned his attention back to his unexpected companion. She hadn't moved, but her breathing seemed stronger now. He arranged his pack as a makeshift pillow beneath her head, then settled himself against the opposite wall, pulling his combat knife from its sheath. The blade gleamed in the dim light as he placed it across his lap, not threatening, but ready. Then he waited. Hours passed. The storm raged outside, but within the outpost an uneasy calm prevailed. Kel drifted in and out of consciousness, never fully surrendering to sleep. His training wouldn't allow it, not with an enemy combatant present, regardless of her condition. A soft groan pulled him fully awake. The alien woman's eyes fluttered open, those violet orbs now alert and wary. She attempted to sit up, wincing as pain lanced through her injured arm. Her gaze darted around the shelter, assessing, calculating, before finally settling on Kel, then inevitably on the blade resting in his lap. Her body tensed, preparing for a fight she couldn't possibly win in her condition. In one fluid motion that belied her injuries, she lunged for the knife. Kel reacted with the reflexes of a seasoned soldier. He caught her wrist mid-grab, twisting it away from the weapon. In the same movement, he pinned her against the wall, his other arm pressed against her throat, not choking, but restraining. A stream of foreign syllables erupted from her lips, harsh musical sounds that held no meaning for him, but conveyed her fury perfectly. Her free hand clawed at his arm, drawing blood. Even injured, she moved with the deadly efficiency of someone who had been trained to kill since childhood. Her every movement was calculated, precise, the instincts of a predator momentarily cornered. "Try that again," Kel growled, increasing the pressure against her throat. "And I'll finish what I started. But for now, live. Because you owe me something." She stilled, those violet eyes burning with defiance despite her vulnerable position. More alien words spilled from her lips, softer this time, but no less intense. Kel released her slowly, retrieving his knife and backing away, though never taking his eyes off her. To his surprise, she didn't attack again. Instead, she rubbed her wrist where he'd gripped it, watching him with a mixture of fear and calculation. He expected the rage that would surely come, the vengeance he was entitled to exact. Instead, Kel reached for his canteen. With deliberate movements, he unscrewed the cap and extended it toward her. "Drink," he said, his voice rough from the ash and smoke. Slowly. Confusion flickered across her features. She made no move to accept his offering. "It's not poisoned," he added dryly. "If I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have carried you through that canyon." Hesitantly, she reached for the canteen, her fingers brushing against his. The water was cool against her parched throat, and she fought the urge to gulp it greedily. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice carrying the musical cadence characteristic of her species. "Why help me? You know what I am." Kel reclaimed the canteen, his eyes never leaving hers. "You're still breathing," he said simply. "That's reason enough." The answer seemed to unsettle her more than any threat could have. She looked away, studying the sealed door, the dust-covered floor, anything but the human whose mercy she couldn't comprehend. "Your signal lured my team here," Kel continued, his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "8 good people. I'm the last one." She flinched, the movement almost imperceptible. Not guilt exactly, more like recognition, confirmation of what she already knew. "If you're waiting for me to deny it, I won't," she replied, meeting his gaze again. "But there are things you don't understand." "Then help me understand," Kel said, shifting the knife in his lap. Not a threat, but a reminder of the precarious balance between them. She closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering courage or perhaps searching for words that wouldn't sound like hollow excuses. "My name is Nara," she began, the admission of her identity already a breach of her training, "and I never wanted this mission." In the shadows of the outpost, as the storm continued to rage outside, Nara's story unfolded, memory by painful memory. She had been a scientist once, specializing in xenobiology. Her research had led her to question the propaganda that painted humans as mindless conquerors. She had voiced these doubts, quietly at first, then more boldly as evidence mounted, until the day her superiors silenced her with a choice: execution for treason or redemption through service. "They offered me a way to prove my loyalty," she explained, her voice barely audible above the howling winds outside. "As bait for a human reconnaissance team, I would transmit the distress signal, appear wounded and vulnerable. Your people would investigate, and mine would be waiting." "You were expendable," Kel observed, no judgment in his tone. "Yes." The admission seemed to cost her something vital. "I always knew that, but saying it aloud, this is the first time I've dared." Her mind drifted back to that day, the day her life as she knew it had ended. The chamber had been cold, sterile. 3 high-ranking officers sat before her, their blue faces impassive behind the glowing data screens that displayed her research findings. Years of xenobiological studies on humans, anatomical similarities, evolutionary parallels, cognitive structures. Work meant to help understand the enemy. Work that had led her to uncomfortable questions. "You've accessed restricted files 17 times, the central officer stated, his voice flat. "Civilian casualty reports, cultural archives, pre-war historical records." Nara had stood straight, her scientific training keeping her voice steady. "My research required context. Your research required knowing how to kill them efficiently," the female officer to the right countered. "Not understanding their poetry." The third officer, older than the others, studied her with eyes that seemed to see through pretense. "You study enemies, not to kill them, but to understand them." It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "Understanding is not treason," Nara had argued. "Sympathy is," came the immediate reply. "And your latest paper suggests more than academic interest in their survival." They had evidence, communications with like-minded researchers, theoretical models questioning the official narrative of human aggression, even a forbidden human cultural text found in her personal quarters. The choice they offered wasn't really a choice at all. "Execution for treason," the central officer had said, or service, redemption through sacrifice. Service meant becoming bait, a lure for human reconnaissance teams, expendable, forgettable. She remembered the cold medical table where they'd implanted the tracking and signal device beneath her skin, the sterile pad where she'd pressed her thumb, authorizing her own sentence, the understanding that she was now a tool, not a person, a means to an end. "How many teams before mine?" Kel asked, pulling her back to the present. Nara met his gaze steadily. 3. She didn't tell him that she'd never seen the aftermath before, that she'd been retrieved unconscious each time, waking only to be prepared for the next mission, that this was the first time she'd looked into the eyes of someone she had helped condemn. Kel absorbed this information in silence, turning it over in his mind. Her story aligned with the tactical inconsistencies he'd noted. Why leave a single survivor at the ambush site? Why not finish the job? Because her role had ended when the trap was sprung. She was never meant to engage or survive. Your people think you're dead, he concluded. If they've bothered to check, she agreed. The explosion was meant to eliminate all evidence, including me. The revelation hung between them, reshaping the dynamics of their forced alliance. Neither fully trusted the other, but understanding had begun to take root. Fragile, but undeniable. Their uneasy truce was shattered by the sound of movement outside, too deliberate to be the storm. Kel was on his feet instantly, knife at the ready, motioning for Nara to stay down. "Scouts," she whispered, recognizing the pattern of footfalls. "My people. They're tracking us." "How many?" "2, maybe 3. An advanced team." Kel assessed their options, none of them good. The door he'd welded shut now trapped them as effectively as it had protected them. The outpost had no rear exit, and the storm outside made long-range visibility impossible. An advantage for the hunters, not the hunted. "They'll call for reinforcements once they confirm we're here," Nara warned. "We have minutes, not hours." Kel moved to the single dirty window, careful to stay concealed. Through the swirling ash, he caught glimpses of movement. Efficient, coordinated, military. "We need to move," he decided, turning back to her. "Now, before they surround us completely." He gathered his meager supplies, checking his weapon. 6 rounds left, barely enough for a fighting retreat. His leg wound had reopened during his brief rest, the makeshift bandage now soaked through with blood. Nara noticed his worsening condition. "You can't run on that leg." "Watch me," he replied grimly, limping toward the far wall where erosion had created a narrow gap, barely visible, but potentially their only escape route. His first step sent shooting pain up his injured leg, nearly buckling his knee. The second step was worse. By the third, his face had gone ashen, teeth clenched against the agony. Nara moved to help him, slipping under his arm to support his weight. Kel immediately stiffened, pushing her away with unexpected force. "I don't need your help," he growled, steadying himself against the wall. Nara stepped back, her violet eyes flashing with something between irritation and understanding. The distance she maintained wasn't merely physical. It was the practiced restraint of someone trained to keep emotions controlled, to observe before engaging. Nara, daughter of the wastelands, the one they had trained to shoot without questions, the one who had once killed for a mere look. Now she watched him with that same calculated assessment. "If you want to die, die," she said coldly. "I'm not going to be your burden." She turned toward the gap, clearly intending to leave without him. "I saved you, remember?" Kel called after her, his voice strained with pain and pride. Nara paused, looking back over her shoulder. "You saved the bait," she replied evenly. "You chose this yourself. Now go, or lean on me." Their eyes locked in silent battle. His refusing to show weakness, hers refusing to show pity. For a long moment, neither moved, the sounds of approaching scouts growing louder outside. Finally, Kel exhaled sharply. "If we die because I'm slow—" "We won't," she interrupted, returning to his side and slipping under his arm once more. "But we will if we stand here arguing." This time he didn't push her away. In that moment, the roles reversed. The rescuer became the rescued. The bait became the guide. Neither acknowledged the significance of this shift, but both felt it, a fundamental change in the tenuous balance between them. Together they slipped through the gap in the wall, emerging into the chaotic swirl of the storm. Visibility was near zero, but Nara moved with confidence, guiding them along the canyon wall. Each step was agony for Kel, but he matched her pace, one painful stride after another. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, masked by the storm's fury. For now, at least, they had gained an advantage. They had traveled for nearly an hour when the storm began to abate, visibility improving enough to make out the silhouettes of abandoned machinery ahead, the remnants of an old mining operation. Massive excavators and haulers, now little more than skeletal husks, created a maze of twisted metal and shadows. "We should go around," Kel murmured, his tactical instinct screaming danger. Nara shook her head. "Too exposed in the open. This gives us cover." Before he could argue, she guided them into the metal graveyard, navigating through narrow passages between rusted equipment. The footing was treacherous. Loose debris and sharp metal fragments threatened to trip them with every step. They were halfway through when Nara suddenly froze, her body tensing against his. "Wait," she whispered. Kel heard it a moment later, the soft crunch of footsteps on loose gravel. Not behind them, but ahead. They'd walked into a pincer movement. "Trap," he breathed. They backed away slowly, seeking an alternate route. But the sound of movement came from multiple directions now. The scouts had anticipated their path and positioned accordingly. A flash of blue skin appeared between two derelict haulers. Kel shoved Nara behind a massive gear assembly, just as energy bolts sizzled through the air where they had stood. 3, maybe 4, he assessed, reaching for his weapon. 5, Nara corrected, peering through a gap in their cover. 2 on the left flank. An energy bolt struck their shelter, sending molten metal spattering dangerously close to their position. They couldn't stay here. The old machinery wouldn't withstand sustained fire. "On my mark," Kel whispered. "Run for that overturned crawler. I'll cover you. Your leg. Just go when I say." He waited for the pattern of fire to ebb, then leaned out, firing 3 precise shots. A cry of pain told him at least one had found its target. "Now!" he shouted. Nara sprinted for the crawler, her lithe form dodging between debris. Kel followed, his injured legs screaming in protest. He was halfway there when movement caught his eye. A soldier had circled behind them, weapon raised and aimed directly at his back. Time seemed to slow. Kel knew he couldn't turn fast enough, couldn't dodge, couldn't return fire. The bolt would catch him square in the spine, and that would be the end. But the killing shot never came. Instead, Nara appeared as if from nowhere, throwing herself between Kel and the soldier. The energy bolt meant for him caught her in the shoulder, the impact spinning her around. She fell hard, a terrible burn scorching her blue skin. Rage and something else, something he hadn't felt in years, surged through Kel. In 3 strides, he reached the soldier, who was already adjusting his aim for a second shot. Kel's knife found the gap in the alien's armor where neck met shoulder. A twist, a pull, and the soldier collapsed, violet blood pooling beneath him. Kel rushed back to Nara, dragging her behind the crawler as more fire rained down around them. The burn on her shoulder was severe, blackened flesh radiating outward from a central point of impact. "Stupid move," he growled, tearing a strip from his already tattered shirt to create a makeshift bandage. Nara winced as he dressed the wound, but her eyes remained clear. "Now the score is even," she managed through clenched teeth. "Not yet," Kel replied, his voice tight. "Not by a long shot." The remaining soldiers were closing in, converging on their position. Kel counted his remaining ammunition. 2 shots left. Not enough. "Can you run?" he asked. Nara nodded, though the movement clearly cost her. "Not fast, but yes." "Then we move on 3. Stay low. Head for that ridge line." He pointed to a rocky outcropping that might lead them out of the equipment graveyard. "Ready? 1, 2, 3. They broke cover simultaneously, zigzagging through the debris field. Energy bolts tracked their movement, superheating the air around them. Kel fired his last 2 shots, not aiming to kill, but to force their pursuers to take cover. The strategy worked just long enough. They reached the ridge and scrambled up, loose rocks cascading behind them. Once over the top, they slid down the other side into a narrow gully that offered momentary concealment. "Keep moving," Kel urged, supporting Nara, as her injured shoulder clearly caused her increasing pain. They pushed on, leaving the sounds of pursuit behind them, temporarily at least. Hours blurred together as they navigated the treacherous landscape. In the distance, the outline of another structure emerged, larger than the outpost, partially buried in the side of a cliff. "We can rest there," Nara suggested, her voice strained from the exertion and pain. "It's an old mining facility, abandoned decades ago." Kel nodded, too exhausted for words. His wound had stopped bleeding, but infection was setting in. His skin hot to the touch, eyes glazed with fever. He wouldn't make it much further without proper medical attention. The mining facility offered better shelter than the outpost. Multiple rooms, defensible positions, and crucially a medical storage unit that might still contain usable supplies. Nara eased Kel onto a dusty cot in what had once been an infirmary, then began searching through cabinets and drawers. While Kel rested, Nara explored deeper into the facility, looking for anything useful. In what appeared to have been an administrative office, she discovered a terminal, ancient by current standards, but somehow still connected to an emergency power cell. Curiosity drew her closer. She brushed away layers of dust from the screen and input panel. To her surprise, the terminal activated at her touch, its screen flickering to life with a pale blue glow. The system contained mostly technical data, mining reports, equipment inventories, personnel logs, but a subfolder labeled Personal caught her attention. She hesitated only a moment before accessing it. The entries belonged to a human officer, someone named Hammond, stationed here during the early phases of the conflict. His logs began as typical military reports, but gradually evolved into something more personal. More troubled. Day 47, one entry read, intercepted enemy communications today. Tactical data, as expected, but also conversations, normal conversations, about families, about food, about things that have nothing to do with war. It's disconcerting to hear them sound so ordinary. Nara scrolled forward through the entries, increasingly engrossed. Day 58, patrol encountered civilians today. The Blue family had a child with them. Everyone was on edge. We've been told they use children as weapons sometimes, but when the building collapsed, Jenkins didn't hesitate. He ran in and pulled the kid out. I saw the parents' faces. The gratitude looked exactly like it would on a human face. Exactly. Day 61, I can't stop thinking about that child. What if we're wrong? What if this whole war is based on a fundamental misunderstanding? I should report these thoughts, but I know what would happen if I did. The last entry was dated just days before the facility appeared to have been abandoned. Day 67, orders came to withdraw. No explanation. I'm leaving this log behind, though no one will probably ever read it. If you're Blue and you find this, know that at least one human wondered if we could have been something other than enemies. Nara sat back, her mind reeling. A human soldier, questioning the war, seeing her people as people, years before she had begun her own questioning. The realization shook something fundamental in her understanding of the conflict. She returned to the infirmary, the discovery weighing heavily on her mind. Kel's condition had deteriorated rapidly during her absence. The fever had taken hold, pulling him into a haze of delirium. His head rolled side to side, eyes unfocused, seeing things that weren't there. Raya, he murmured, reaching out to empty air. Flank left. Vex, do you copy? Jace, watch your 6. Nara paused in her search, watching as he spoke to Ghosts. The names of his fallen team tumbled from his lips. Tanner, Cruz, Lynn, Dex. Each one called with increasing desperation. They're gone, she said softly, returning to his side with antiseptic and bandages. They can't hear you. Kel's eyes focused briefly on her face, confusion evident. Raya? No, Nara replied, gently cleaning his wounds. They're dead, Kel. You didn't save them. She hesitated, then added quietly, but you saved me, and I'm part of their guilt now. The words seemed to penetrate his fever haze. His expression cleared momentarily, recognition returning to his eyes. Not your fault, he whispered. Orders. Like mine. Nara continued treating his wounds in silence, her movements careful and methodical. When she finished bandaging his leg, she resumed her exploration of the facility, searching for anything useful. In a back storage room, she discovered a metal container buried beneath debris. Prying it open revealed a charred flag, the emblem of his military unit still recognizable despite the burn marks. Beside it lay a single identification tag, similar to the ones Kel had given her, but belonging to another soldier. She returned to the infirmary, the flag and tag in hand. Kel was more lucid now, the fever temporarily receding. I found these, she said, holding them up for him to see. How many have there been? In this war? Kel's eyes fixed on the items, recognition and pain flashing across his features. You don't want to know, he answered, his voice hollow. I do, she insisted. Tell me. He closed his eyes briefly. Millions, on both sides. Maybe more. We stopped counting after a while. Nara sat beside him, the weight of his words settling between them. Why do we keep fighting? Your people. Mine. Because stopping means admitting it was all for nothing, Kel replied, his gaze drifting to the ceiling. And no one wants to be the generation that surrenders. She looked down at the tag in her hand, running her thumb over the engraved name of someone she'd never known. Someone who had died fighting her people. Someone who might have killed hers. "When does it end?" she asked, though she knew he had no answer. "You don't owe me loyalty," he said suddenly, his voice stronger. "But you already made your choice. You didn't finish me when you could." Nara placed the tag and flag on a nearby table. "Rest," she told him. "We'll need to move again soon." Despite her protest, Nara settled on a nearby cot, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion. Within minutes, her breathing deepened into sleep. Kel maintained his vigil despite his own fatigue. The fever made his thoughts drift, memories of his team surfacing like bubbles in murky water. Faces, names, laughter around a campfire. All gone now, reduced to ash in a canyon that had become their tomb. He should hate the blue-skinned woman sleeping peacefully across from him. By all rights, he should want her dead. Instead, he found himself wondering about her world, her people. What could drive a species to such desperate measures? Morning came, bringing with it a clarity that had been absent in the chaotic flight of the previous day. Kel's fever had broken during the night, his body responding to the rudimentary treatment and much-needed rest. Nara was already awake, preparing a meager meal from their combined rations. She handed him a portion without comment, then sat cross-legged on her cot, watching him with those unnerving violet eyes. "They'll find us eventually," she stated, no fear in her voice, only resignation. "This facility is too obvious, too exposed." Kel nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "How long do we have?" "A day, maybe less." He considered their options, none particularly appealing. They could keep running, but his injuries would slow them down. They could try to reach his extraction point, but that was days away and likely compromised. Or they could make a stand here, in this abandoned facility that offered some defensive advantages, but ultimately would become their prison. The decision crystallized in his mind with surprising clarity. He reached for his combat knife, the same one that had rested in his lap during their first conscious encounter, and held it out to Nara, handle first. "You want to survive," he said quietly. "I don't. That's all." Shock registered on her face, followed quickly by suspicion. "What game are you playing, human?" "No game. A way out, for you. Return with proof that you completed your mission. My death redeems you in their eyes." Nara stared at the offered blade, understanding dawning in her eyes. "You want me to choose?" "No," Kel replied, his eyes steady on hers. "I want you to remember who you were, and who you want to be tomorrow." Slowly, almost reluctantly, she reached for the knife. Her fingers closed around the handle, the weight of it strange and terrible in her grip. She stood and Kel remained seated, making no move to defend himself. "Put it down," she said, her voice barely audible. Kel didn't move. She stepped forward then, her movements fluid and deliberate, the practiced motions of someone who knew precisely how to end a life. With calculated control, she raised the blade until the cold metal touched his throat. "Last words, human?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kel looked up at her, then closed his eyes. "Yeah," he replied. "Your grip is weak." Her fingers twitched involuntarily, the blade pressing momentarily harder against his skin, drawing a thin line of crimson. Seconds passed in complete silence. When Kel opened his eyes, Nara had turned the knife in her hand. The blade now pointed toward her own chest. "One of us had to choose," she said quietly, "and I made my choice." The blade clattered to the floor between them. "I can't," she admitted, the words tearing from her throat. "I should, but I can't." Kel didn't move, didn't reach for the fallen knife. "I know," he said simply. That acknowledgement, that he had known all along what her choice would be, should have angered her. Instead, it felt like absolution, like recognition of something within her that she herself had only just discovered. Their moment of truth was interrupted by the distant sound of engines, the distinctive whine of scout vessels approaching from the east. Nara moved to the window, her posture tense. "It's the commander," she said, her voice tight with fear. "He's come himself." Kel joined her at the window, ignoring the protest from his injured leg. In the distance, 3 vessels descended toward the facility, kicking up clouds of ash as they landed. From the lead ship emerged a tall figure, his blue skin darker than Nara's, his bearing unmistakably that of someone accustomed to absolute authority. "He'll kill us both," Nara whispered. "Me for treason, you for existing." "Then we separate," Kel decided, You go out, tell him I'm dead. Show him my dog tags as proof. I'll find another way out. He won't believe me. Make him believe you. Nara turned to him, conflict evident in her expression. And if I betray you, if I tell him exactly where you're hiding, then I die, Kel answered simply. But I don't think you will. He removed his identification tags from around his neck and pressed them into her palm, closing her fingers around the metal discs. The warmth of his hand lingered on hers for a moment before he withdrew. Go, he urged, before they surround the building. Nara nodded once, then moved toward the door. She paused at the threshold, looking back at him one last time. No words passed between them. None were necessary. Then she was gone, walking steadily toward her commander and what she hoped would be believed as her successful mission. Kel watched from the window as Nara approached the imposing figure. She stood tall, showing no fear as she extended her hand, his dog tags dangling from her fingers. Her voice didn't carry to where he hid, but her body language conveyed confidence, assurance. The commander took the tags, examining them briefly before returning his attention to Nara. His expression remained impassive, but something in his stance suggested skepticism. He gestured toward the facility, clearly demanding a more thorough explanation. Nara shook her head, pointing instead to the canyon they had traversed. She was redirecting them, Kel realized, trying to lead them away from his hiding place. But the commander wasn't convinced. He barked an order, and 2 soldiers moved toward the facility, weapons drawn. Nara stepped in their path, her posture defiant. The commander's hand struck out, catching her across the face with enough force to send her sprawling in the ash. Something cold and hard settled in Kel's chest at the sight. His hand found his sidearm, checking the ammunition one final time. 6 rounds. 3 enemies in view, possibly more in the vessels. Not good odds, but he'd faced worse. The soldiers reached the facility entrance, proceeding with tactical precision. Kel moved deeper into the shadows, positioning himself for maximum advantage. The first soldier entered, weapons sweeping the room methodically. Kel allowed him to pass, waiting for the second. When both were inside, backs exposed, he made his move. The first shot caught the trailing soldier in the shoulder, spinning him around. The second shot, more carefully aimed, found its mark in the center of his chest. The first soldier turned, firing blindly into the shadows. Kel rolled, ignoring the searing pain in his leg, and returned fire. His third shot went wide, but the fourth caught the soldier in the neck. He fell, gurgling his last breaths. Outside, the situation had deteriorated. The commander held Nara by the throat, his rage evident even from a distance. She struggled in his grip, feet barely touching the ground. Kel moved to the doorway, knowing he was exposing himself but unable to watch her execution. 2 shots left, nearly impossible range for his sidearm, but he had to try. He steadied his breathing, took careful aim, and squeezed the trigger. The shot went wide, but it achieved his goal. The commander's attention shifted from Nara to the new threat. He dropped her, reaching for his own weapon. Kel's final shot never found its target. The commander fired first, the energy bolt striking the doorframe inches from Kel's head. He ducked back inside as a barrage of fire followed, superheating the air around him. The temporary shelter had become a death trap. No exits, no cover that would withstand sustained energy weapon fire. Kel was cornered, weaponless, injured, and alone. Except he wasn't alone. Through the smoke and chaos, a blur of movement caught his eye. Nara had retrieved a fallen soldier's weapon and was firing at her own commander. The unexpected attack forced him to seek cover behind his vessel, momentarily relieving the pressure on Kel's position. Their eyes met across the battlefield, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Without hesitation, Kel moved toward her, exposing himself to potential fire but trusting in her covering barrage. The commander emerged from behind his vessel, weapon trained on Kel's running form. Nara adjusted her aim and fired a precise shot that caught her former superior in the arm, causing his shot to go wide. Kel reached her side, taking cover behind a rocky outcropping. "Nice shot," he gasped, breathless from exertion and pain. "Not nice enough," Nara replied grimly. "I've never killed one of my own before." The implication hung between them. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. Not for him, not as an abstract choice, but for herself. She had chosen a side. The commander's voice rang out, amplified by his vessel's communication system. "Surrender the human, Nara, and your death will be quick. Continue this treachery, and I promise you, suffering beyond imagination. Nara's grip tightened on her weapon. He doesn't make idle threats, she warned Kel. Neither do I, Kel replied, taking the weapon from a fallen soldier nearby. And right now I'm threatening to keep us both alive. Together they fought their way from cover to cover, each protecting the other as they retreated toward the canyon. The commander pursued relentlessly, his rage making him careless, but no less dangerous. Kel's injury slowed them considerably, his leg leaving a trail of blood in the ash. Nara supported him as best she could, but their pace was faltering. They wouldn't outrun their pursuers for long. As the canyon loomed before them, a new plan formed in Kel's mind. The old comms post, he said between labored breaths. It's our only chance. Nara understood immediately. The abandoned outpost they'd passed earlier contained equipment that, if still operational, could connect to his people's emergency channels. Help could arrive within hours, if they survived that long. The comms post stood isolated against the canyon wall, dust-covered and seemingly forgotten by time. They reached it just as the commander's forces closed in, taking cover inside the dilapidated structure. Kel immediately moved to the communications array, fingers flying over the ancient controls. To his surprise, emergency power still flowed through the systems, enough to send a basic distress signal if properly configured. Can you reach your people? Nara asked, keeping watch at the window. Yes, Kel confirmed, making the final adjustments. His finger hovered over the transmission button. Then do it, she urged. Call them. But Kel hesitated, his hand suspended above the controls. The logical choice, the only choice, was to signal for extraction. His people would come, guns blazing, and eliminate the threat, including Nara. Why don't you contact your people? She asked, genuinely confused by his hesitation. Kel looked up from the console, his expression unreadable. Because I trust you more than them, he admitted quietly. The confession hung between them, profound in its simplicity and its implications. In the span of 2 days, this alien woman had earned a trust that his own commanders, with their political agendas and classified objectives, had long ago squandered. Outside, the commander's forces had surrounded the outpost. His amplified voice cut through the thin walls. You have nowhere left to run. Surrender now, or we burn you out. Kel moved away from the communications array, joining Nara at the window. How many? He asked. 6, including the commander. Too many. Kel checked his appropriated weapon, energy levels critically low after their running battle. Nara's was in similar condition. They had enough firepower for perhaps one good exchange, then they'd be defenseless. Last stand, he suggested, a grim smile touching his lips. Last stand, she agreed, returning his smile with one of her own, sad but determined. They positioned themselves on either side of the entrance, weapons ready. When the first soldier breached the doorway, they opened fire simultaneously, catching him in a deadly crossfire. He fell, but 2 more rushed in behind him. As the battle intensified, Kel noticed one of the blue-skinned soldiers hesitating, his weapon trained on Kel but not firing. Nara shouted something in her native language, harsh musical sounds that seemed to reach the soldier on some fundamental level. For a moment, it seemed the soldier might lower his weapon. His eyes, similar violet to Nara's, flickered with uncertainty. The commander noticed the hesitation. Without warning, he swiveled his weapon and fired. Not at Kel or Nara, but at his own soldier. The blast caught the hesitating warrior in the chest, sending him crashing against the wall before slumping to the ground. Disobedience is death, the commander snarled, turning his attention back to the battle. Kel took a hit to his already injured leg, the energy bolt searing through muscle and bone. He collapsed, weapon slipping from nerveless fingers. Nara stood over him, continuing to fire until her weapon gave out with a pathetic whine. The commander himself entered then, flanked by his remaining soldiers. His face was a mask of triumph as he surveyed the scene, the fallen human, the defiant traitor standing over him. Finish him, he ordered Nara, gesturing to Kel's prone form. Prove your loyalty one last time, and perhaps I will consider mercy. With deliberate movements, Nara knelt and retrieved Kel's combat knife from his belt, the same blade she had earlier refused to use against him. She stood slowly, the weapon gleaming in her hand. For one terrible moment, Kel wondered if he had misread her completely. If, when faced with certain death, she would choose survival at any cost. Then with a fluid motion that spoke of absolute conviction, Nara threw the blade, not at Kel, but at the commander's feet, where it embedded itself in the dusty floor with a dull thud. "I was your bait," she declared, her voice steady and clear. "Now I'm his shield." Rage contorted the commander's features. He raised his weapon, the barrel aimed directly at Nara's heart. "Then die with him." Kel summoned his remaining strength, lurching upward to push Nara aside as the commander fired. The bolt caught him in the shoulder instead of her chest, sending him crashing back to the floor. What followed was chaos. Energy bolts lighting up the confined space, screams of pain and rage echoing off the walls. Nara had retrieved a fallen soldier's weapon and was returning fire, the expression on her face one of cold determination. One of the commander's soldiers circled to the side, taking aim at Nara as she focused on the commander. Kel saw the movement through a haze of pain. Without hesitation, he threw himself forward, directly into the path of the incoming shot. The energy bolt struck him in the back, the impact driving him to his knees. "Kel!" Nara's scream cut through the chaos. The soldier advanced, weapon raised for a killing shot, but another blue-skinned warrior stepped between them, his weapon lowered slightly. "Nara," the soldier said, his voice carrying even through the battle noise. "Stop this. Surrender now." Nara froze, recognition dawning in her eyes. "Varric, your brother has more sense than you," the commander called out. "He knows where true loyalty lies." Varric's eyes, the same violet as Nara's, held conflict and pain. "You chose them?" he asked, disbelief evident in his voice. "I chose someone who didn't finish me when he could," Nara replied, her weapon still raised. "You always shot first, Varric. Always followed orders without question." "This is treason," Varric said, but his weapon remained lowered. "No," Nara countered. "This is the first real choice I've made." The commander's patience ended. Without warning, he fired, not at Nara or Kel, but at Varric. The bolt caught him in the back, driving him forward. He fell, eyes wide with shock, reaching toward his sister. "Weakness is contagion," the commander snarled, "and I burn out infection." Something broke in Nara at the sight of her brother's fall. With a cry that seemed to contain years of suppressed rage, she lunged at the commander, firing repeatedly. The bolts caught him in the chest and throat, driving him backward until he collapsed against the wall, his expression frozen in eternal fury. The remaining soldiers, seeing their commander fall, retreated in disarray. Some fled, others fought on briefly before falling to Nara's relentless assault. When silence finally fell, Nara knelt beside her brother's body. No words passed her lips, but her hand gently closed his staring eyes. Kel dragged himself to her side, his own wounds leaving a trail of blood across the floor. "I'm sorry," he managed, the words inadequate against such loss. She didn't respond immediately. When she finally looked up, her eyes were dry but held a pain deeper than tears could express. "He was the favored one," she said quietly. "The perfect soldier. When I was sentenced, he didn't speak for me. Didn't even look at me." "And yet he hesitated," Kel observed. "Too late," Nara replied, rising to her feet. "Always too late." Outside, the first light of dawn painted the ash-covered landscape in hues of orange and gold. The storm had passed completely, leaving behind an eerie stillness that felt almost sacred after the violence of the night. Kel breathed weakly, each inhalation a struggle against damaged ribs and energy bolt wounds. "You stayed," he whispered, the words costing him dearly. Nara's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that transcended their biological differences. "You didn't run," she replied simply. They sat in silence for a long while, watching as the light grew stronger, revealing the full extent of the destruction around them. The bodies of the commander and his soldiers lay scattered across the outpost floor, their blue skin already growing ashen in death. "If I had died," Kel finally asked, his voice barely audible, "would you have survived?" Nara considered the question, her violet eyes reflecting the rising sun. "I would have become bait again," she answered honestly. "I chose death to become someone new." "You didn't die," Kel observed, "and I didn't either." "No," she agreed, "we didn't." With visible effort, Nara rose and approached the commander's body. She knelt beside it, her movements respectful despite everything. From his armor, she removed an ornate insignia, a symbol of rank and authority among her people. She studied it for a moment, running her fingers over the intricate metalwork that represented generations of tradition and unquestioned loyalty. Then, with a decisive gesture, she cast it into the dust. "So we start from here," she said, returning to Kel's side. They left the outpost as the second sun crested the horizon, casting long double shadows across the desolate landscape. Behind them, smoke still rose from the ruined structure, a dark pillar against the morning sky. The commander's vessel remained where it had landed, its systems damaged beyond quick repair during the firefight. Kel limped beside Nara, each step a negotiation with pain. His wounds had been dressed as best they could manage with limited supplies, but he needed proper medical attention, something neither of them could access now. Their path led them away from the canyon, across a vast plain of ash and rock. No clear destination guided them, only the need to put distance between themselves and the scene of violence they'd left behind. After hours of silent walking, they paused atop a low ridge to rest and assess their surroundings. The landscape stretched emptily in all directions. No settlements, no ships, no signs of either of their peoples. "What are you now?" Kel asked suddenly, breaking the long silence between them. Nara gazed out at the horizon, her profile sharp against the pale sky. "No one," she answered simply. A ghost of a smile touched Kel's lips. "Good," he said. "That's where we'll start." As they prepared to continue their journey, something caught Nara's eye. In the far distance, barely visible against the haze, silhouettes moved. Vehicles or perhaps ships approaching from the east. Impossible to tell if they were human or her kind. Impossible to know if they brought rescue or more danger. Kel saw them too. His hand moved instinctively toward his weapon before remembering it was empty, spent in their last stand. "We could hide," Nara suggested, gesturing toward a nearby ravine that might offer concealment. Kel considered this for a moment, then shook his head. No more hiding, he decided. No more running. Together they stood on the ridge, exposed and vulnerable, watching as the distant figures drew gradually closer. Whatever came, friend or foe, salvation or doom, they would face it as they had faced everything since that first moment in the wreckage. Together. The figures grew larger on the horizon. Kel and Nara remained where they stood, neither advancing nor retreating. The choice had been made. In a universe bent on division and destruction, that choice might prove the most powerful weapon of all.